So escapism is generally regarded as a very negative thing. Not just in this specific niche of self-improvement, but just in general. Like if you ask most people, is escapism a good thing or a bad thing? They're going to say it's a bad thing. And there's good reason for this. You know, there's a specific image that comes to mind to most people when you say escapism. And this image is usually very negative. But in this video, I'm going to try and explain how escapism in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's more a tool to be used effectively. And if you know how to use it, it can be really crucial to your success. So I'm going to start by talking about when I worked in door-to-door sales. And there was real rhetoric about how to, basically work ethic, that we were taught in the training for door-to-door sales. And that was basically just to work as hard as you possibly could. Like, it was a very high energy environment, and they really wanted you to work super hard. And there wasn't much sort of emphasis on taking a break and resetting. And at the time, I was super excited to be working in sales. You know, it was something I'd really wanted to do for a long time. And so I really took it quite seriously, and I worked super hard, and I would knock on loads of doors. Like, you were meant to knock on about 120 to 150 doors a day, and I would do that. I would hit that consistently, like no problem. I would be really pacey in between doors, and I would just keep going. And all the no's I got, I'd just go faster and faster with each no. And in a sense, this is great, right? But if you looked at my actual sales records, it was very inconsistent, and I wasn't actually doing that great in terms of how many sales I was actually getting down. But it was weird because I was working really hard, right? I was knocking on all these doors, and everyone was, there was this whole rhetoric in the company about, just keep knocking and eventually you'll get those yeses. But I was really confused, and I'd come back to the end of the day where we'd all meet and we'd all count up our numbers and how many doors we'd knocked and how many sales we'd made and stuff like that. And people would always say to me oh, well done mate, you knocked on a lot of doors today, oh, that's really good. But I'll be like, is it? Who cares ultimately how many doors I've knocked on? The proof is in the pudding. How many sales I've actually got, that's the more important thing, surely, right? And then there'd be other people who had they got more sales than me, and they'd knocked on less doors. And these people would be they'd be oh mate, imagine if you knocked on more doors. You're being lazy, why didn't you knock on more doors? And I'd be but at the end of the day, they got the sale, so why does it matter? And I began to get more skeptical about, well, a lot of things, but I began to get quite skeptical about this rhetoric that they were saying of just the harder you work, the best you'll do. It appeared to me that it wasn't as simple as that. There was more to it. And I began allowing myself basically to take more breaks while I was working, even if that came at the cost of how many doors I was knocking. I began to become more internally aware of my internal state, and just recognise when I was not being productive anymore, when I needed to reset, I needed to take some time off. And several times I just begin to basically start taking time off, and I'd be okay, I'm not doing well at the moment, I don't feel good, let's take a quick break. I'll just go to a cafe nearby where I was pitching that day, get a cup of tea or a coffee or something, and just sort of sit there by myself and just kind of relax and just allow myself to return to baseline. And often when I did this, I recognised that I had a lot of kind of tension in my body, and it felt I don't know the science behind stress and stuff like that, but it felt like there were a lot of toxins in my muscles that I hadn't even noticed when I was in the kind of intense environment of selling. But Now I was sitting in this comfortable environment of a nice coffee shop. I was in London at the time, which is like the sort of one of the best places in the world for coffee shops, in my opinion. But yeah, in a nice coffee shop with really overpriced coffee, with some nice relaxing music playing, and it was warm, and there was no pressure. I was just sitting there relaxing, and I could just feel my body kind of reset. I could now feel all this sort of tension that I'd been ignorant to when I was in that hyper sort of competitive situation. And in allowing myself to feel it, I was allowing myself to kind of relax it at the same time. And this was a really interesting revelation to me. And I remembered a book that I read before I started in this job. It's like a really good book to read just for sales generally. And this book is called Psycho-Cybernetics. And this book, it basically talks about visualizations and kind of how they work. And it's a really good book. I definitely recommend reading it, especially if you're a bit skeptical about this stuff. But there's one chapter in particular where the guy talks about basically using visualizations to escape, as escapism. So the author of the book, before he wrote this book, he was like a surgeon, like a plastic surgeon basically, and obviously it's quite a stressful situation to go into, performing operations on people's faces. And so he had to find ways to kind of reset his brain before he went into the operation, where he wasn't bringing all of his thoughts from before then into the operation with him. And what he'd do is he'd just sit down for 20 minutes, close his eyes, and he'd imagine himself in like a really nice environment. And he doesn't specify what kind of environment this is, but he encourages the readers to just work out one that works for you. And the thing he suggests is kind of like, imagine you're in a nice study, and you've got lots of books on the shelf, and you've got, a nice armchair that you're sitting in, and, maybe you're reading a book, and he just encourages the readers to really go into the sensations of what it would be to be in, like, your happy place. People talk about the happy place today, and it's kind of summarised here. And he says in the book that he would explain this technique to people, and people would say to him, like, oh, but isn't that just escapism? And he'd be like, yeah, it is escapism. But the thing is, you need escapism. You need your body to relax, to get out of the situation it's in, to be able to reset, to get back to baseline, so that it can go back into the new situation it's in, fully afresh, And yeah, he was like, yeah, you need to do this. And this was the thing that he swore by, and he would do it before his operations, and he would also do it after his operations as well. And yeah, basically what I've realised is we need to reframe how we think of escapism. And escapism isn't bad per se, but it's actually quite a useful skill that you need to do in some sense. The big issue is just finding a form of escapism that effectively resets you and isn't detrimental to your long-term health. And it's finding that balance that's a real key thing. I think a lot of social media addiction just boils down to escapism. Like, people just look at their phones, not because they're really like addicted to it in the way that we kind of think, but it's just because there's something negative about their current situation that they want to escape from. Either they're stressed out at work, or they're tired, or it's something like that, and that's when they resort to their phones. So I do think social media addiction is better framed as escapism. The trouble is, this is actually quite a bad form of escapism, because it doesn't really do much for you in the short term, and it has a lot of long-term negative effects, because it fucks up your focus and your attention span, stuff like that. So the real key with escapism is finding a form of escapism that is, one, genuinely allows you to reset and go back to baseline, but secondly, has a tolerable amount of negative side effects. You know, I think with some forms of escapism, particularly if you're in a very stressful situation like I was in with the sales, it's alright to have a small amount of negative stuff as the escapism, as long as it's not so bad, as long as it's at quite a low level. So to take my earlier example of going into a cafe when I was working door-to-door sales to reset, that was effectively escapism, right? And in some sense, what I was doing was actually like quite a bad habit. There were sort of bad habits associated with going down and like having a nice hot drink in a cafe. You know, if I was having a hot chocolate that has sugar in it, sugar's addictive. You know, sugar is bad for your body. You know, or if I'm having a cup of tea or coffee, at the end of the day, that has caffeine in it. It's a drug that is going to have an impact on my sleep. You know, caffeine's addictive, all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I allow these small negatives to exist because in the long term, in the quantity I'm having them, it's not too bad, and they still have quite a good ability to reset me properly. And so most of us, what we need to do with escapism is just finding something that toes this balance effectively. I'll share with you another example. Recently, I was about a month ago at work. I was really struggling. I had lots of work that I didn't really know how to do. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was really like lost in my workload. And I remember cycling back one evening and I was just really stressed out, really worried about it. And I didn't have much money on me at the time, but I just decided, like, you know what? I'm really stressed out. I need to reset. Let's go and just buy some food. I'm not going to cook this evening. Let's just go and buy some food. And so I just went to a Thai restaurant that was on my way back. And I just sat down and just was like, oh, could I get a table for one? And I just sat down, bought some foods, had a nice beer to go along with it, and ate that food, and went back home. And I was completely reset by that experience. I felt so much better. And again, there are some negatives in there, in a sense that, you know, I was spending money. I was eating food that wasn't necessarily very healthy. You know, like I had some sort of curry or you know, some kind of sort of sauce that had some sugar in it, probably had some plant seed oil, stuff like that, which isn't necessarily like fantastic for your health, whatever. But again, in the low quantities that I'm having it, it's worth it for the sort of reset that it allows my brain to do. And I think for most people, this is a good place to start, like as a sort of way of escapism, is something like that, something like just going out for a meal because you're stressed out and you need to relax, or you know, just sitting in like a nice cafe and just allowing yourself to decompress and listen to the nice kind of lo-fi music that people play in cafes. On the flip side, you can have forms of escapism that are really good for you, like have super low levels of like negative side effects, but at the same time, they're not quite powerful enough for most people's situation. So I think a good example of this is going for a walk. Like, going for a walk is like an amazing way to reset you, you know, and it's super healthy. Like, it's really good to walk. You know, there are basically no negative side effects of it. And you can go for a walk and it can clear your head really effectively. That being said, it's not quite as powerful as other forms of escapism. And while it's still good to do, I think for some people, particularly if they're in a really negative situation, they need to be a little bit more keen, a little bit more willing to do something that's a tiny little bit more unhealthy, just to allow themselves to get that good hit, that feeling of just really being able to relax and reset that you need. And of course, like I say, with the phones, you got stuff that's on the other side of that, which is like really negative stuff, like going out drinking, like binge eating, stuff like that, that is really has lots of negative side effects and actually doesn't actually allow you to reset that effectively, you know. So it's just finding that balance of both, basically. And that is really the secret to escapism. Yeah, I think escapism is a tool. It's not a bad thing per se. It's just something we need to learn to use effectively to reset. And if you can find a way to reset effectively, it's really powerful. So that's the end of the video, guys. Hopefully there's something you can take away from it. I'm doing some coaching at the moment, so if you're interested, top link in the description. Just book a call with me. I can see if you're a good fit. I do kind of just basically helping people with their goals. So if you feel kind of directionless, you feel stressed out, you don't know what to do with your life, book a call with me and we can just talk through your goals, talk through what you want to do with your life, give you a bit of direction. I know from personal experience myself how much more helpful it is to have someone else do it, because you can do all this stuff yourself, but it's just so much better if someone else can do it for you. So yeah, jump on with me, be great to hear from you. And apart from that, we'll see you in the next video.